Albert Camus once wrote in his book, The Myth of Sisyphus, that every illness and absurdity has its roots and meanings. Generally speaking, and from my own experience, those who are afflicted by the malevolent disorders are living in the illusions of the inescapable past. The past distorted and nightmarish abstract. This is especially true with the schizophrenia spectrum and PTSD disorders, as they either reimagine the already afflicted pain or seek measures to thrust themselves into the fictitious reality of hallucinations, as the brain continues to cope with its ever-pursuing nightmares. Some seek to suppress it, others simply venture deep into the rabbit holes of the past in order to find their causes, which upon venturing that way will almost certainly catch the inevitable flashbacks and episodes one will expect from tinkering with the past. There are many Hollywood depictions of these people and their journey, but unfortunately, these poor souls are either demonized as violent people or simply portrayed incorrectly and meshed into different disorders. As several as good depictions of psychotic behaviors go are on screens, these handful are very obscure. One such gem comes from a person who took an artistic depiction of his subjects, and also a philosophical one, despite their portfolio, which being completely from a different medium. A Canadian filmmaker whom you might have heard from such titles as The Fly, Scanners, Existence, and Videodrome. We're talking about David Cronenberg, the man behind the body horror genre, and the man challenging the conservative notions of filmmaking of the times being. Shot in a similar vein and philosophy as the film Dead Ringers, aka taking a very subtle body horror aesthetic, where unquestionable qualities manifest into a protagonist and his inhumane and insane actions. This 2002 film, based on a novel by Patrick McGrath, is quite a lot to deconstruct, titled Spider. What does a solitary confinement greet you with? Walls. 4 walls with varying qualities to them, to be more specific. The title shots alone are just these run-down walls that symbolize where our character has been occupying and storing his physical self with, as there are signs that he was dealing with his locking up psychologically with paintings and scribbles on the walls, which is generally a method of coping caused by lack of outside contact and isolation, which in mentally ill is more intense and prolonged, taking up less than 70 hours to kick in and affecting the person permanently on his mental side. And also the meaning here is of isolation and neglect. The opening shot of the train passengers boarding is very intriguing and subtle, as it demands you to watch for the odd and out of place. It establishes our character in the sea of formal, casual, and urban by distinctly giving us a visual of a man wearing torn and worn, out of place clothing, with half-shaven and disgruntled and exhausted face, that separates him from the crowd easily, but not so aggressively, telling us that he is in fact fresh off a mental boat, so to speak, visualizing him as both young and bizarrely very old and eccentric, incoherent and almost methodical in his approach to walking and thinking, along with speaking. There is something so saddening about his sluggishness and childlike qualities, such as picking up litter from streets, stuffing it into his pockets, as if it was something important. The utmost silence that really gives the feel of loneliness and abandonment, as Clegg marches on murmuring with the camera slowly panning behind him, and intruding in his mindset very visually, to give a sense that we are observing his tragedy and are not in his shoes. The atmosphere certainly feels almost unwelcoming and harsh, with Clegg being portrayed as this very childish and limping sort of character. No happy music and no happy faces. This is a man keen on finding the basis of the truth and tragedy into a world that has rejected him. Clegg eventually reaches the house for the mentally ill, where he meets the lady called Mrs. Wilkinson. The ever so slightly disheveled and disoriented Clegg meets one of the peculiar and talkative residents, called Mr. Terrence, whom apparently can't be trusted as told by Mrs. Wilkinson. The same pervasive emptiness is only confounded by the darkness and unkept atmosphere, brimming in the wooden structure and materials of the house. The crudeness of the staff and the unwelcoming atmosphere seems to be a small roadblock of the whole ordeal that Clegg has to go through, as his episodes already start to take effect, which is hinted by camera effects and visual shots, reminiscing and informing the viewer that something unpleasant is going to take place, that memories of the past are about to catch up, as every little innocuous thing triggers something in Clegg's mind. This is a man chasing the past and shrouded in the unknown, trying to uncover himself slowly and piece by piece. In the next morning, resident Terrence informs Clegg that the place has certain qualities and quirks to it, but ones that the occupant will quickly get used to. Terrence seems to be on the basis that this place is conspiring and challenging the inner psyche as a means of completely sabotaging the person to make him go back to the asylum, for there to be eternally trapped. Upon venturing into the unknown of the town, Clegg comes across a graveyard near a shed, as he mumbles the words "mom" incoherently as usual. But just what happened to him? From this point on, the lines between reality and imagination start to dwindle, as Clegg's nightmare begins to unfold again and again. The illusion of progress seems to be unfolding in his ever-shattered mind, as he both literally and unironically tries to piece the puzzle of his demise and tragedy, only for a path to destabilize and make him delusional again. Daniel Clegg's venture into madness or sadness begins at two locations: a house and a bar, in which we see manifestations of himself with his family, other being that of mom and dad. Here we get what is the most beautiful directing of Clegg's past. Instead of being a flashback to a previous moment of life, it instead integrates Clegg's adult self and child version into one room, giving us an idea of not only how he felt and also how he feels and looks back upon these said moments, or if these moments are true at all. Hatred, confusion, realization upon the ones who have betrayed him. All these attributes fit his man's motives and serves as the main objective/driving point for his ever-revealing quest. Clegg himself, emotion-wise, seems to be on a somewhat contradicting side, as he struggles to find a side which fulfills his needs for closure. Or perhaps this is a method of adjusting the clock of reality, as he once believed that his family was in a good condition and in a healthy romance, as a means of avoiding the psychotic relapse. There is also ambiguity in the presence of Clegg himself. Does the places he visits occupy actual life with a reality, or are they manufactured from Clegg's mind itself? If the latter is the case, then Clegg is basically committing an intrusion and stalking. The film isn't clear about this one bit. We're not even sure if his reconstructions of events of Clegg are even accurate or real at all. Ironically and aptly giving a sort of spider's web type of intrigue, where only more nastiness is being unfolded. Clegg's father, being an untrustworthy man in his eyes, is a perfect example of somebody who sees others, mainly women, as objects, in the imagination of Clegg. One such running theme and theory is that the first-time viewer might also think is the theory of patriarchy. You see, over thousands of years, Regardless of cultures, men had this notion that they were on top of a pile, and women were simply placeholders, objects, if you will, which led to imbalance of economy, wars, instability, corruption, and many more. It is this type of egoism and self-centering that disrupts our world, harming everybody, women and men. Men in a different way, because the patriarchal system builds expectations of his ever-fighting and machinist-driven slayer of a man, who seeks domination above all else, putting repeated pressure to those who don't conform or simply are unable to conform, because of certain reasons, be it physical or mental, essentially making a shell of a man, transforming him either into the aggressor or a mentally sick person, who wants to grasp of civil and societal norm, the norm that is imposed by the patriarchy. And Clegg is simply the result of that patriarchal chaos, that objectification that we as humans have embedded since ages. What could have been a lovely experience has been turned into a grisly reminder that for Clegg, all because of his father's obsession with beauty, pride, and lust will matter, the relationships. Sometimes we seriously forget that men and women are equal parts soft and insecure, that we, no matter how much masks we put on, or how much we hide, we still can be broken in a matter of minutes, thanks to these abhorrent laws and practices that pressure us into submission and reshaping. Not only that, but we forget how these acts can be doing or witnessing actually shape us for who we are today. It's these standards that traumatize us and trap us into the pits of complete obscure and the illusions of our past experiences. However, as intriguing this might sound, it simply isn't what this movie chases and attempts to deconstruct, although there is a strong first-time feeling of his fatherly figure's critique. Following this theory, in the middle point of a movie, Dennis Clegg's hallucinations are starting to become more and more psychotic, as he imagines every woman as a prostitute that his father dates and cheats on, overwhelming him to the point of remembering the grisly murder of his mother by his father, which manifests into his almost magical hatred, which ultimately says one thing, that is, being obsessed with your past won't necessarily heal you. The film depicts the hard process of what those who seek to fix themselves go through, and ultimately where and what the situation may end up in, even telling you that it may transform you to the monster that you seek to destroy within yourself, even altering your personality, which turns out to be true, as Clegg's little self orchestrates a murder on a prostitute that his father was in love with. However, it turns out the person in question for murder in front of a spider, Clegg, was actually his mother all along. You see, the main aspect of which this cinematic piece of art presents us comes from depths of mental health issues surrounding the brain and its aspects of judging reality. One of the disorders which is affected by this is schizophrenia, a psychotic and avolition-inducing disorder in which a patient gradually experiences himself in another dimension and rules of existence, being cut off from the rest of the physical and mental world through hallucinations and delusions, whilst in a bubble of exaggeration through mediums of Hollywood and online presences. It definitely is taken with a black eye, as people either ignore or hide it from existence due to social impairing stigmas that direct our societies, especially in the more underdeveloped countries. Millions of people suffer from such mental health conditions without a cure in sight, and a huge political wall blocking them from prosperity and well-being. Whilst not ideally treated today, treatment for such disorders were much harsher and downright sadistic. The situation of the times which kept the people under schizophrenia completely trapped and lobotomized. But bizarrely, no matter the time, nobody ever thought about a cure for this particular disease of mental genre. It wasn't until the 1950s, when the FDA approved chlorpromazine, that serious treatment of schizophrenia had begun. Until then, it was always something else, or a deed of someone supernatural like demons and angels, poltergeists and spirits. There were simply a ton of excuses for keeping the schizos at bay. Here's the thing, people fear the unknown, but more importantly, the people trust in the popular and dumb that circulates around the air, and in the ears. Nobody wants to believe or wants to believe that schizophrenia is associated with violence or murderous behavior, but it is our abandonment which causes such individuals to snap. Our ignorance and blindness. If you are mentally ill, then certainly you are just as invalid as people with broken organs and bones. Instead of visible barriers, there are invisible ones in which there is no attachment or support to be taken externally. Isolation from neglect also causes psychosis, since loneliness confounded by four walls is definitely straining the mind with a lot of dangerous ideas, especially coming from neglect and abuse from ignorant ones. This in turn creates an antisocial dynamic of instability and hatred, which transforms the otherwise childlike individuals into misunderstood monsters that we make, be it intentionally or unintentionally. And once we do have a chance at giving these individuals warmth and understanding, we instead cling onto the rules, dogmas, and stigmas established by the societies, the media, and most importantly institutions, be it religious or governmental. Or in the worst case scenario, we fetishize these illnesses and antisocial psychopathy as being this ultimate magnetic draw for other people, to be exploited by and be fantasized in hopes of becoming special and viewed in the eyes of others, be it negatively or positively. The score by Howard Shore was minimalist, fits greatly as this weird and tragic addition to a sense of Spider's troubled existence. In Cronenberg's mind, the movie takes a philosophical take instead of a clinical one, as a means of relatable connection making with the protagonist and the audience. Clegg, Spider's room itself, is a representation of his emptiness and nakedness. The character Terrence is a made-up character not presented in the novel, and is a unique addition to the film. The movie in a nutshell is a mostly deconstruction of the identity that is falling apart in people with schizophrenia. The movie also takes elements from Freud's Oedipus complex, as the son and father compete for happiness and position for a mother, which also manifests doubly in a prostitute mixing with mother's facial features, found in a prostitute. In a way, we see Clegg's desires and sexual maturity, with perverted and hateful concepts dwelling beneath his mind, as if he's trying to emulate his father, the monster. Clegg's disorder also manifests into his phobias of the past, as he tries to evade the same gas, which he kills the prostitute or his mother, which makes him this very disjointed and haunted by the past type of person, unable to accept the truth, being masked by these fantasies. Essentially, the death of his mother is a metaphor for a replacement from Father Bill, a coping mechanism from Spider Clegg's means of deflecting the reality of the event. The reality that Clegg distorts, that ends up sacrificing a prostitute, or maybe it was his imagination, maybe he killed his actual mother, who knows. It's told very abstractly and confusingly, but also gives you a sense of ambiguity and mystery. Who and why is the main question of this film. The order of a disorder which millions of people suffer, some on medication, are they coping, and some keep wandering in their distorted psyche, unable to keep themselves in check with reality, only to be shunned by society and completely being eliminated as being violent and unfit for existence. The style of this movie is minimalist in general, but at the same time exhibits an aura of coldness and loneliness that is in the Spider Clegg's head, almost going static in certain shots and scenes, While Set's ideal depiction of schizoid disorders and going back to shenanigans and cliches of murderers and the ill, it certainly shows us a good picture of men's fragility and fractured reality, whilst also establishing a presence of ambiguity and mystery around the storyline. The acting itself is also in line with the movie's cold and empty aesthetic, as actors display a certain mixture of grudged, disoriented, and bipolar types of behavior, as a means of portraying the ever so unstable mind of Dennis Spider Clegg, which is ultimately the goal of his movie, to see the unmeasured and unbalanced mentality of those unfortunate enough to be inflicted by the disease of mental qualities. Thank you for listening.